All right, I'm going to go over. I did a couple screen grabs of some basically data visualizations from Chicago CRED's site. I thought they were interesting, and I think they'd be. I want to hear your take on them. So, if Eric, you can put up the per capita homicide rates. Wonderful. Okay. So, I mean, there's no mistaking this. And I want your opinion from all of your work, which is on the street doing this amazing work. Why is Chicago, in your opinion, so much an outlier compared to New York and LA? And I think if you add up New York and LA's numbers, they would still be less than Chicago. Do you guys, and we can open up to any of you, do you have opinions on why Chicago is so much higher than those cities? They're similar sized.
I could tell you one thing is that they've been trying to do some of this work longer than we have.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, that was
they
what I
were,
was going to say.
you know, everybody has their kind of transformative moments. LA's was the Rodney King riots, but it wasn't actually until a big scandal 7 or 8 years later, the Rampart scandal, that
Yeah, Rampart.
people really, the level of brokenness in the police department was just super apparent. Chicago had a big scandal in the 1950s, but then the more recent stuff was the Laquan McDonald video in 2015 is when it came out. The incident happened in 2014. So that was kind of one of our watershed moments. So we're just behind them in some ways. That's one factor. I'm sure there's others. I'm sure Eddie and Vaughn can add to that, but I know that's one of them.
I think you go back to some of the things we said earlier, just in terms of housing discrimination. I think one of the things that LA and Chicago have in common is sort of street organizations and the prevalence of that. I think the history of organized crime in Chicago and New York is similar, but the investment to address it, we've just lagged behind on that. I think the other part that we have to look at in terms of New York and LA is how they policed. I think they incarcerated a lot of people and they gentrified. I think that those are just facts. They did make investments, but they also gentrified. So if you look at Brooklyn today, if you look at Harlem today, they don't look like they did yesteryear.
Yep.
And one of the things we're committed to here in Chicago is to become a safer city, but by healing the people that are here and creating a home for the people that are here. And we don't want our folks to be displaced in the same way they were in cities.
That's a great point. That's part of what I wanted to share, but you're absolutely right around that. Often I think that it is it's an unjust comparison when you look at Chicago, New York, and LA. And I know that we're often compared to them because of the size of our city. But I think a more fair comparison would be what are some of the local cities around Midwest? Minneapolis or Milwaukee, Cleveland, Indianapolis, Detroit. Because I think we would see something very differently. I also, this past year, 2020, we saw spikes in violence increase in the top 40 cities in our country, including New York and LA. And part of it was a result, at least according to studies, is a result of COVID. But there were other challenges along the way. Atlanta, for example, had almost 300% of increase, where here in Chicago we saw 50% increase of shootings and homicides, right? So I think that there's a lot that we could also in these studies about what's happening. And I would simply point out to what we just mentioned just a moment ago, is the larger investment that goes into these communities and not thinking about a 1 or 2 year strategy, but thinking about a 10 or 20-year strategy. And that's also really important. Like if Vaughn made a really good point earlier, and I commend him for this, which is too often politicians, right? They care about their position, their role, right, their employment, and so they're not willing to always take these bold decisions, right, to do the right thing. And that's difficult, right? It's difficult because if you look at our city here in Chicago, for far too long, we just haven't had too many of those leaders, right, to make bold decisions around this. Um, the prime example that I'll give you, here we are, all three of us, kind of expressing our gratitude to our city for their investment, right, of the $30+ million that Vaughn pointed out. and I'm grateful for that. But again, I think about why did it take us this long, and why only 30 million plus? What's the city's strategy to get us to $200 million? Why is it that philanthropy has had to flip the bill, where you think about taxpayers' dollars and where they're going to, like it's an uneven comparison too. So I think about those different things in light of your question, right? Because there are things that the city's government and people did, right, for a certain amount of years to kind of get to where they're at too. Now, the unfortunate part is there has been a lot of gentrification, that particularly with poor neighborhoods. We see some of that here in Chicago, like in the Humboldt Park, the Logan Square area, Pilsen. When Peter talked about earlier about the early 1990s Chicago, listen, I went to prison for homicide in 1994 when Chicago was seeing homicides up to 1,000. So Pilsen today isn't the same Pilsen than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Neither was Humboldt Park, and neither was Logan Square. And I could go down the list of that too. So while I think that we have to think about in the context of like where do we see fewer violence in the cities, and what really attributed to that, and how do we get our own 10-year, 20-year plan as well?
Yeah, one other factor, Tracy, that should be mentioned is the availability of guns. For a couple of reasons. We are surrounded by states with very different gun laws, very weak gun laws, in my opinion. Some would call them something different, maybe, freedom or whatever. But it's really easy to get guns. And because we're Chicago, we're the transportation center of America, there's just a lot of pipelines of activity that come up from whether it's just from the South, places where the gun culture is different. We confiscate like 10,000 guns a year in Chicago. That's just an astounding number of them. That's 30 a day, really, in this city. So I just think that we may have more guns than some of those other places. It might be easier to get them.